Judge Holden, if that's even your proper title. Your reputation precedes you. A trail of violence across the American frontier that defies comprehension. I've faced tyrants and gods, but few with your particular brand of calculated cruelty.
The alien who styles himself mankind's protector. How fascinating that beings of such power still cling to the fiction of moral authority. I've studied your interventions across this continent, selective salvation wrapped in primary colors. Tell me, what principles govern which prayers you answer?
I don't claim to be a god answering prayers. I'm simply someone with abilities trying to help where I can. Every life saved matters. Something your philosophy seems to reject entirely. Your campaign of violence across the territories wasn't selective. It was indiscriminate. Children, women, men, entire villages wiped out. Not for survival or protection, but seemingly for your own satisfaction. What possible justification exists for such wholesale slaughter?
Justification implies moral frameworks I find irrelevant. The universe operates through dominion, the stronger consuming the weaker. Your selective interventions merely confirm this truth while pretending otherwise. You save a village from flooding, while elsewhere thousands perish from drought. You halt a war in one nation, while genocide proceeds unchecked in another. Your power isn't used to its fullest capacity, not because you cannot reshape this world entirely, but because even gods require theater. War is the ultimate truth, Kryptonian. Only in violence is the world truly honest. Your restraint isn't moral superiority, but fear of confronting what unlimited power demands, total dominion or absolute surrender.
You mistake restraint for fear when it's actually respect, for human autonomy, for self-determination, for the right of people to solve their own problems and chart their own course. Total dominion isn't strength. It's the ultimate weakness, the inability to coexist without controlling. I could force my vision on humanity, but that would make me no different from Zod or Darkseid or any tyrant who confuses power with righteousness. You call war the ultimate truth, but I've seen across galaxies that cooperation, not conflict, builds civilizations that endure. Your philosophy isn't some profound insight into existence. It's simply the justification of a predator who can't imagine anything beyond the hunt.
Cooperation exists only within the boundaries of greater conflicts. Your cherished civilizations rise through conquest and fall to stronger forces. This pattern repeats across your adopted planet's history. Your respect for human autonomy conveniently absolves you from addressing structural violence while fetishizing individual salvation. The child you rescue from a burning building returns to poverty and exploitation. The village spared from bandits remains under imperial subjugation. I simply acknowledge what you cannot. That existence itself is warfare in various guises. The predator who recognizes his nature holds more truth than the predator disguised as shepherd. Your Kryptonian father sent you here not as gift, but as conquest. The survival of his bloodline through the projection of power. How many indigenous species across the universe were similarly saved through replacement?
You speak of patterns and structures while missing the most important one, evolution beyond violence. Yes, human history contains endless conflict, but also the gradual expansion of cooperation, of empathy, of rights extended rather than denied. What you call fetishizing individual salvation, I recognize as the fundamental value of every single life, something your philosophical framework conveniently discards. You claim to embrace honest predation, but your methods reveal something else entirely. True apex predators don't require elaborate justifications or philosophical frameworks. They simply act from necessity. Your excessive documentation, your speeches to your followers, your need to articulate dominance rather than simply exercise it. These reveal something beneath your certainty: doubt. You're not the embodiment of war's truth. You're its most desperate apologist.
Evolution beyond violence? A comforting narrative contradicted by evidence. Your adopted species' technological progress has merely amplified its capacity for destruction, from arrows to atomic weapons. The expansion of rights and cooperation exists within imperial frameworks that export violence to peripheries while maintaining illusions of peace at centers. As for my documentation and articulation, these aren't justifications but methodologies. War requires knowledge, Superman. The true master of warfare understands what he destroys before destroying it. I catalog languages before erasing their speakers, study botanical specimens before burning their habitats. This isn't doubt, but thoroughness. Your accusation reveals your own uncertainty, the fear that without your performative restraint, you would recognize your own nature as conqueror. Tell me, when General Zod threatened your adopted home, did you not ultimately resort to killing? Did your evolved empathy provide any alternative when survival was truly threatened?
Zod's death haunts me precisely because I understand what you don't. That taking life should never be without consequence, even when seemingly necessary. Your cataloging of what you destroy isn't thoroughness but trophyism, the collector's compulsion masquerading as scientific objectivity. You document to possess what you eradicate, creating an archive of dominance that serves no purpose beyond self-aggrandizement. And yes, humanity's capacity for violence has evolved alongside its technology, but so has its capacity for connection, for understanding across boundaries that once seemed impassable. The same networks that can launch missiles also deliver food to the starving and medicine to the sick. The same scientific advances that created atomic weapons now power cities. This complexity, this capacity for both creation and destruction, is what your warfare philosophy fundamentally misses. Existence isn't binary domination or submission, but constant negotiation between competing values and needs. Your certainty isn't insight but limitation, the inability to perceive beyond your predetermined conclusion.
A negotiation exists only where power balances temporarily. Your examples prove my assertion. Atomic energy powers cities because nations achieve destructive parity, not moral evolution. Networks deliver medicine to maintain labor forces, not from enlightened compassion. The consequences you feel for taking Zod's life aren't universal moral truths, but cultural programming specific to your adoptive environment. Had you been raised by different humans in different circumstances, your moral framework would reflect different valuations entirely. This reveals the arbitrary nature of the principles you defend so passionately. The universe remains indifferent to your distinctions between necessary and unnecessary violence. Stars explode, annihilating entire systems. Planets die, extinguishing all life forms regardless of their moral development. I simply acknowledge what exists rather than imposing narrative frameworks that comfort. Your rejection of domination while possessing ultimate physical power makes you not evolved, but contradictory. Perhaps the universe's most magnificent hypocrisy.
Yes, my values were shaped by the Kents, by Smallville, by Kansas. But their source doesn't invalidate their worth. These principles weren't randomly assigned, but developed through generations of human experience, through trial and error, through the recognition that societies built on cooperation ultimately outperform those built on mere dominance. The universe's physical indifference doesn't negate the meaning we create within it. Stars explode without intent. Conscious beings make choices. That's the fundamental distinction your deterministic philosophy conveniently ignores. As for hypocrisy, there's none in possessing power and choosing restraint. The contradiction would be claiming to value life while using my abilities to dominate rather than protect. You call yourself a judge, but a true judge weighs evidence from multiple perspectives. You've appointed yourself executioner of humanity's potential future, based on selective reading of its past. That's not judgment. It's prejudice dressed as inevitable conclusion.
Your distinction between cosmic indifference and conscious choice creates artificial boundaries where none exist. Consciousness emerged from the same indifferent processes that form stars and planets, its choices determined by prior conditions no less than celestial movements. Your cherished cooperative societies succeed only through exporting exploitation beyond their visible boundaries or during temporary resource abundance. When true scarcity returns, your moral frameworks collapse into survival calculations, as demonstrated repeatedly throughout human history. The judge title isn't self-appointed, but descriptive. Eyewitness existence without the distorting lens of hope. Your Kryptonian biology grants you immunity from human vulnerability, allowing you the luxury of idealism. You'll never starve, never suffer disease, never experience the fundamental insecurities that reveal humanity's true nature. From such insulated heights, moral pronouncements come easily. Tell me, if stripped of your powers and subjected to true human vulnerability, would your principles survive intact?
Your determinism conveniently eliminates personal responsibility, another trait of the predator seeking philosophical cover rather than honest acknowledgement of choice. Yes, consciousness emerged from natural processes, but that emergence created something distinct. The ability to reflect on our actions and their consequences, to imagine alternatives, to choose paths not dictated solely by immediate circumstance. As for vulnerability, I've lost my powers several times, faced mortality, experienced pain and fear and uncertainty. Those experiences didn't weaken my convictions. They strengthened them by confirming what I've always believed, that courage and compassion aren't dependent on invulnerability, but are most essential when we're at our weakest. Your philosophy collapses under its own contradictions. If all existence is merely deterministic processes playing out, then your violence is no more true or honest than cooperation. Both would simply be inevitable expressions of prior conditions. Yet you clearly believe your approach represents some superior insight, suggesting you don't fully believe your own deterministic framework.
Temporary power loss experienced with the knowledge of probable restoration hardly constitutes true vulnerability. Your argument about determinism misunderstands my position. Recognition of warfare as universal constant doesn't eliminate choice, but contextualizes it within its actual parameters rather than fictional moral frameworks. The superior insight isn't in violence itself, but in acknowledging what exists without comforting illusions. Your cooperative ideals flourish primarily where resource abundance makes competition unnecessary, collapsing precisely when true scarcity emerges. Throughout human history, periods of peace represent brief intervals between necessary conflicts over resources, territory, or power, not evolution beyond violence. Even your Justice League operates through monopolized force, the threat of superior violence maintaining order. The distinction isn't whether force underlies social organization, but whether this truth is acknowledged or disguised. Your costume itself communicates power and capacity for violence. Your entire protective function predicated on superior force. Why maintain this theater, if not for subconscious recognition that dominance underpins even your moral order?
You're right about one thing. Our difference is indeed perceptual. You see only the darkness in human existence. I see both the darkness and the light. You fixate on inevitable endings. I see the meaning created in the journey. Yes, the child I saved today may face other challenges tomorrow, but that child's life has value independent of future outcomes. Yes, systems of exploitation persist, but they're neither natural nor inevitable. They're human constructions that can be progressively dismantled. Your nihilistic certainty isn't wisdom, but surrender. The abandonment of possibility in favor of comfortable despair. If Earth falls someday, despite all efforts to protect it, The legacy will be found not in final outcomes, but in how we lived, in kindness offered without expectation, in courage shown against overwhelming odds, in hope maintained not from naivety, but from choice. You claim to embrace existence without reservation, but you've reserved yourself from its most profound possibility, that in our connections to others, we create meaning that transcends our inevitable physical end.
Our fundamental difference isn't moral, but perceptual. You impose narrative and meaning on a universe indifferent to both. Your selective interventions maintain the illusion of justice while the underlying structures of exploitation continue uninterrupted. You save individuals while systems that create suffering remain untouched. This isn't moral restraint but theater, performance disguising the emptiness of your enterprise. The child rescued today returns to poverty tomorrow. The disaster averted in one location manifests elsewhere. War continues its eternal dominion whether acknowledged or denied. When your adopted planet eventually falls, to cosmic catastrophe, to its own contradictions, or to superior force, what legacy will your restraint have purchased? Not salvation, but merely delayed inevitability. In that final moment, perhaps you'll recognize what I've always known: that existence belongs ultimately to those who claim it without reservation or apology.